fresh meat.
Freddy Krueger's twisted origin and franchise explained. Without an ounce of doubt, one can say that what Dracula and Frankenstein are to literature, characters like Voorhees and Freddy Krueger are to cinema.
You are all my children now.
Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund, is one of Hollywood's most feared serial killers and appears as the main protagonist of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise.
Great to be back in business. Thanks to you.
But there have been plenty of them throughout the course of history, so what makes Krueger the definitive first among his contemporaries? Well, there are several reasons, but one that stands out is his ability to hunt you down in your sleep by sort of dreamjacking you.
Miss me?
Freddy Krueger started his career by initially killing young kids in a small Springwood neighborhood. But once the locals found out about him, they burned him alive, and while dying, he made a deal with the Dream Demon to return as an immortal supernatural serial killer.
Daddy's waiting for you, little girl.
His modus operandi was simple. He would hurt you in your dreams and you'd feel the effects in real life. Dreams are a fairly mysterious phenomenon, and sleeping is one act where we let ourselves be vulnerable to all the threats. Moreover, it becomes a challenge to tell if the threat and Freddy are real.
This is God.
Director Wes Craven made the first Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, and it has since spawned 5 sequels, 1 reboot, 1 crossover between Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and 1 meta-slasher film, which was also directed by Craven. In this video, we seek to talk about the undying and unyielding legacy of the late Wes Craven and dive deep into the origin, life, and crimes of the supernatural monster known as Freddy Krueger, aka the Springwood Slasher. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Number 1. The tragic life and death of Amanda Krueger and the bastard son of 100 maniacs. A young Amanda Krueger resolved to become a nun at the age of 18 and changed her name to Mary Helena. When she finally became one, she was assigned as the caregiver for the insane patients of Weston Hills Hospital. One night, the guards accidentally locked her up in the infamous tower with the most insane patients. The animalistic madmen did not just beat Amanda to a pulp, but also raped her more than 100 times.
She was raped hundreds of times.
When she was finally found, Amanda was almost dead and pregnant. Since she was a servant of God, she didn't opt for abortion of the child, and 9 months later gave birth to Frederick Charles Krueger, a child who was later adopted by an abusive alcoholic named Mr. Underwood. Amanda continued to be a nun after the horrific ordeals, only to find out that her bastard son had become a serial killer who murdered several children. She followed her son's trial closely and was so appalled at his release that she committed suicide in the same tower where Witch witnessed the most profane conception. However, Amanda Krueger returned in her spirit form to help those who were battling her defiling son's spirit. She made her first appearance in Dream Warriors and then in The Dream Child, in which Freddy used her to birth himself once again in the dream world.
It's a boy!
Here we learn that Freddy was afraid of his biological mother's powers and attempted to keep her locked away. Amanda Krueger is one of the strongest characters of the Nightmare on Elm Street anthology. Despite all she went through, she fought to the death to keep her son from becoming the monsters who birthed him. And even after passing, Amanda continued her quest as a spirit in the dream world.
Stop feeling it. You can start using it.
Number 2. When the Tormented One transformed into the Tormenter. Freddy had an obviously troubled childhood, constantly bullied in school for his lineage and his illegitimate past. He spent some time at a state-run facility for orphans, only to be adopted by an alcoholic, abusive, and immoral pimp. Mr. Underwood was the sole parental figure in the growing up years of Freddy's life, and this dastardly nature started to take a toll on young Freddy. During the night, Mr. Underwood would go on soliciting street prostitutes or acting as a pimp and bringing passers-by to the woman. When he was not indulging in this living, he enjoyed his time by beating Freddy with razor straps and belts, so Freddy received parental love in the form of sadistic and ruthless beatings. As the years passed, the beatings continued, and his father even tried to train Freddy into becoming a pimp, but Freddy couldn't learn the despicable tradecraft. Frustrated at Freddy's failure, Mr. Underwood would grow into a further torturous father, and ultimately, Freddy was abandoned and left on the streets to fend for himself and live alone. This would later turn out to be Underwood's greatest mistake. He would wander from town to town in search of food, lodging, and money, but his scarred body and lack of skills made it difficult for him to get a job. Naturally, he started living in places like underground sewers and ate unfortunate alley cats to survive. One day, a group of school kids tried to rob a drunk and degenerate-looking Freddy Krueger. However, what they didn't know was that this homeless dude was an age-old victim of assault and torture and definitely knew how to fight back. Freddy promptly split open the head of one of the boys and looked at the splattering blood with glee and delight. He dragged the dying boy to an abandoned cellar and stared as the boy twitched in agony and became motionless. The streaming blood reminded him of his own past experiences. The only difference was that Freddy was the one to be tormented and his father was the tormentor. Now that Freddy was finally in control, he took out a razor that he stole from his father and made 4 deep incisions into the young boy's belly.
Daddy's waiting for you, little girl.
He was relieved to make someone taste the medicine that he had tasted all his youth. Eventually, Freddy would wander into the peaceful and happy neighborhood of Springwood. He was aggrieved at the sight of young children playing happily on the streets, children who never had to face even an iota of pain and suffering that he had felt. He was determined to inflict this pain on them.
Don't worry, baby. Mommy just had to take her medicine.
Number 3. Freddy's daughter who became his ghost of Christmas past. The fascinating thing about serial killers is that they can live and breathe under the same sky as us, can go to the same pub as us, work in the same school we study, and yet outing them as a repetitive offender is close to impossible. When Freddy was in his 20s, he started working as a janitor in a Springwood school. There he met a student named Loretta who saw something positive and good in Freddy. He had been neglected and abused his entire life, and Loretta made him feel loved and cared for. The serial killer developed feelings for Loretta, and the two of them got married and had a daughter named Catherine. To a distant observer, the marriage looked like a normal, happy, pedestrian one. In fact, Freddy tried hard to quit his murderous ways. However, Freddy used the boiler room of a power plant to keep his weapons and newspaper clippings of the young kids who had disappeared from Springwood. On one momentous and apocalyptic day, Loretta found Freddy's boiler room and his pitch-dark secrets.
Fred, please. I won't tell.
She was distraught at the realization that her dear husband was in fact the killer of several innocent children who were around Catherine's age. As soon as Freddy learned that his cover was blown, he came at her with the intent of shutting her mouth by silencing her forever. Despite her promise of keeping his dark side safe, he strangled her to death and didn't realize that he had done it in front of Catherine. Catherine would later be adopted and her name changed. After she grew into an adult, she came back to Springwood to stop her father's spirit.
Your shift is over.
Number 4. The ferocious fiend Freddy Krueger becomes immortal. In an attempt to get retribution against the acts of cruelty inflicted upon him by his father and the bullying of his previous classmates, Freddy resorted to killing their children. He would lure or abduct the youngsters to the power plant's boiler room and torture them with his fishknife gloves. Once he was done, he would throw body parts in various nooks and corners of Springwood. That's how he got the notorious title of the Springwood Slasher. Freddy was arrested for the murder of his wife Loretta and the Springwood children. However, a drunken judge and loopholes in the American penal system led to his release.
Somebody forgot to sign the search warrant in the right place, and Kruger was free just like that.
This was when Amanda committed suicide. The Springwood residents couldn't stand a serial killer walking among them. Naturally, the townsfolk led a mob similar to the villagers who attacked Castle Frankenstein, and they burned him to death. Unbeknownst to them, a dying Freddy was contacted by dream demons, who gave him an opportunity to continue his sadistic carnage in the dream world.
You shouldn't have buried me. I'm not dead.
According to the deal that he made with the dream demons, Freddy would be given immortality and the ability to remain in the dream world unquestioned, and in return, he would have to continue his killing spree. Any injury he inflicted in the dreams would reflect in the real world, so even in death, Freddy was as sinister as he was in real life.
Well, it ain't Dr. Seuss.
Number 5. Freddy's supernatural abilities and powers in the dream world. Freddy was clearly an expert manipulator and vicious criminal before his death at the hands of the Springwood parents. However, after his death, he became an unyielding force of havoc and destruction. Freddy's powers were a function of how many souls he kept and controlled. These powers gave him several abilities like controlling people's dreams and pulling them into the dream world.
I want to draw some blood.
As long as he was in their minds, he can control their nightmares to further his nefarious plans. Furthermore, Krueger used people's fears to torture them psychologically. Because he was able to control, manipulate, and possess the various parts and aspects of his victim's psyche, he would toy around with them by changing his form and the environment, which he usually made to look like the boiler room that he used when he was alive. Another source of Kruger's powers was the number of people who knew about his existence and feared him. When Freddy is at the height of his strength, he could possess humans, his corpse, objects, and even animals. Also, he could straight away pull people from the real world into the dream world, as was shown in the 5th installment of the Elm Street series. However, if Freddy's victims wake up while he was with them, Freddy would be pulled to the real world. Here, he would have superhuman strength and stamina, but be vulnerable to physical damage. This aspect was extensively used in the fight sequences between Freddy and Voorhees in the film Freddy vs. Jason, and also in the 1991 film Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare.
And you, my pretty, and your little soul, too.
As we already mentioned, Freddy gets his powers through fear and the souls he acquires. As soon as he kills someone, he absorbs their soul, which augments his abilities, and he learns the skills or attributes of his victims. Apart from this, he's an excellent shapeshifter and has the potential of turning himself and others into various animals, objects, or insects. In the film The Dream Master, he killed Debbie by transforming her into a cockroach and then crushing her.
Jesse, help!
There is no Jesse. I'm Jesse now.
Number 6. Kruger vs. the Power of Young Love. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, he was able to use his dreamy modus operandi. Naturally, he had to figure out another way and presented himself in the dreams of Jesse. Kruger tricked Jesse into picking up the clawed glove, and once Jesse did so, Kruger possessed him. The possession would transform Jesse's body into Kruger's, and he would go on a murder spree. The possessed Jesse killed several guests at his girlfriend Lisa's party. Her love got through Jesse and gave him the power to resist Kruger from the inside. Ultimately, Kruger became weak and was burnt by Jesse, who mysteriously controlled Kruger's powers. Strangely, out of all the films, Jesse Walsh was the only male protagonist to be the prime victim of Kruger. Nevertheless, Mark Patton as Jesse and Kim Myers as Lisa made a great on-screen couple.
What's wrong, Joey? Feeling tongue-tied?
Number 7. When Kruger met his dream world match. Patricia Arquette played Kristen Parker in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. Kristen had the ability to pull people into her own dreams. In the movie, Freddy had managed to kill the children of all those who were responsible for his death and those who burnt him, and smartly enough, he made all these deaths look like suicide. However, he couldn't kill Roland, Taryn, Joey, Philip, Jennifer, Will, and especially Kristen. All of these children were sent to an asylum where Kruger killed Philip by throwing him down from the building and Jennifer by shoving her head into a television. Since both these deaths look like suicides, the others were administered with doses of a hypnosis-inducing agent. In this group, Hypnosis, Kristen and her dream warriors tried to battle Kruger in the dream world. The kids used their self-imaginative dream powers to join hands and take Kruger down.
1 down, 2 to go.
Number 8. Alice in Dreamland. Kristen was becoming one of the most favorite characters of the anthology, but her character was short-lived as Kruger killed her in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master by burning her to death in his boiler room. However, as Freddy pushed her into the boiler and took her soul, she managed to transfer her powers to Alice Johnson. After this, Freddy used Alice's powers without her knowledge to bring more people into her dreams. This way, he killed Sheila by giving her his trademark death kiss, in which he would suck the air out of someone's lungs. In the real world, Sheila dies of an asthma attack. He also killed Alice's brother Rick by stabbing his chest with his clawed gloves.
No pain, no gain.
His final victim was Debbie, whom he murdered by transforming her into a cockroach and then crushing her in a cockroach motel. However, Alice used a shard of glass and showed Kruger his monstrous self. As soon as this happened, the souls that were trapped inside him broke out of his body, tearing him apart. Lisa Wilcox as Alice Johnson appeared in the next installment, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5: The Dream Child, in which Kruger broke all boundaries by possessing the soul of an unborn child.
Let's go. I want to learn stuff from you.
Number 9. What goes around comes around. In the 4th installment, Alice was able to destroy Kruger by releasing all the trapped souls of her friends. This event turned him into a hollow husk, and he was left weak, powerless, and seemingly destroyed. However, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 5: The Dream Child, he used his mother Amanda Kruger, whose spirit birthed him once again. After being reborn, he started using Alice's powers to pull more victims into his world of dreams. He killed Greta by force-feeding and ultimately choking her to death. Dan was killed by Freddy in a motorbike accident. He shapeshifted into Dan's motorbike and crashed him head-on against a truck. After killing Dan and Greta, he fed their souls to Alice's unborn son Jacob with the intention of turning him into the purest form of evil. Alice realized this and attempted to find Amanda so that they could banish Kruger back to hell. However, Alice was not successful and Freddy got his next victim in the form of Mark. Freddy cut a comic book version of Mark, and the same was followed in the real world. However, Alice sought the help of her friend Yvonne, and Yvonne ultimately tracked Amanda down. Alice helped her son Jacob to use his powers and turned Freddy back to his infant form, only to be absorbed by Amanda. Had it not been for Amanda, Freddy would have taken over Jacob, and heaven knows what would have followed. This was Freddy completing a circle, and indeed, what goes around comes around. Number 10. The one who lived to bring Freddy to justice. Several years after the incidents of the last film, Freddy managed to kill all the children of Springwood except one teenager named John Doe. His name is strange because when cops find an unnamed male dead body, they refer to the corpse as John Doe, so it seems that his fate was sealed long before. Anyway, John ended up with a child psychiatrist named Maggie Burroughs, who concluded that John was suffering from amnesia. To revive his memory, she took him to Springwood. Interestingly enough, Freddy was now at the peak of his powers and kept the entire Springwood in a state of mass psychosis. Unfortunately, 3 troubled children named Tracy, Carlos, and Spencer came to Springwood with John Doe and Maggie. They planned to leave Springwood but took refuge in the abandoned house in which Freddy Krueger was once burned alive. Freddy killed Carlos by exploding his head, and Spencer by possessing his body and sending him to hell. John had seen Freddy in his dreams and thought that he was Freddy's child. However, Freddy revealed to John before killing him that his child was a girl.
Only long enough for you to bring me back my daughter.
John managed to pass this information to Maggie, who discovered that she was Freddy's child and that her name was changed from Catherine to Maggie upon adoption. Finally, Maggie discovered that the only way to kill him was to bring him back to the real world, as the dream demons would continually revive Freddy in the dream world. She managed to do so, and with the help of Tracy, she was able to explode his body with a pipe bomb and give Springwood a few years of peace.
I've been away from my children.
Number 11. Clash of the Immortal Titans, Kruger vs. Voorhees. After the events of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, the townsfolk of Elm Street realized how Freddy functioned, so they erased and destroyed anything and everything that was related to the monster. Those who dreamed about Freddy were put in quarantine and given continuous doses of hypnosis-inducing agents. Now, because no one feared him anymore, Freddy was unable to come back to the dream world, so he devised a plan to wake up another immortal and equally horrific serial killer, Jason Voorhees.
I found someone.
The idea was that Jason would go to Elm Street to begin his massacre of innocent children, and the blame would fall upon Freddy Krueger, thus inciting the required fear in the hearts of the people. The plan worked out, and Freddy was back in business. However, what Freddy didn't realize was that Jason wouldn't stop killing the children. Naturally, Jason claimed one of Freddy's victims, and this brought the 2 immortal serial killers against each other. The ensuing battle was deadly, and why not? The dead are fighting.
Hey!
Number 12. Wes Craven's New Nightmare, 1994. Wes Craven directed this meta-slasher film as a standalone sequel that didn't follow the continuity of the Elm Street anthology. Robert Englund played himself and Freddy Krueger, while Heather Langenkamp played herself and Nancy Thompson.
And what, a romantic comedy?
Just because it's a love story.
The film revolves around how Heather has become a star in Hollywood, and even 10 years after the first film, she is acclaimed for her role as Nancy. But things soon take a wrong turn when Heather starts to dream about Krueger. Her son Dylan begins behaving abnormally while she receives calls from a mysterious person who speaks in Freddy's voice. The film received positive reviews. It showed the ill effects of a horror film on those who helped to make it, and how their lives are affected, haunted, and hunted by the demons they created. Freddy was given a more serious and less comical character. Instead of a pair of clawed gloves, he was wearing a mechanical arm with metal claws. The positive response from fans and critics led to the creation of the next installment, Freddy vs. Jason, in 2003.
I love the expression on your face. I think I'd like to see us together again.
Number 13. Future of the franchise and Robert Englund's hopes and visions. The original Nightmare on Elm Street was written and directed by Wes Craven in 1984, with Robert Englund as the horror icon. Since then, he starred in the Nightmare sequels and became a veteran horror actor. Naturally, he's become more than just another persona attached to the franchise. Many scripts for a future Nightmare film passed through him. The good news is that Spectre Vision's Elijah Wood and Daniel Noah have expressed interest in making the installment, and Mike Flanagan of The Haunting of Hill House says that he has a new pitch. With these developments, Robert Englund is hopeful that the production of a new Nightmare film will soon get started. It would be nice to make a movie about the courtroom incidents that led to Freddy's release and subsequent death. While the flicks in the past have thrown light on Freddy's backstory, they just don't seem to really bring to the surface the events that led to his gruesomely ruthless and violent nature.
No screaming while the bus is in motion!
With today's technological advancements, they can use state-of-the-art visual and practical effects and do great things with a franchise and its antagonist. Englund is of the opinion that Wes Craven's children Jessica and Jonathan are more than efficient in seeing things through. Whatever may be the future, the late Wes Craven gave us all some memorable things to cherish. May the soul of Wes Craven rest in peace. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.